Hello, everybody, and welcome to ConTinual, the con that never ends. Tonight in the panel room, we're talking about witchy fiction, and it's going to be so much fun because I have a great panel of folks, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, starting with Barbara.
Hi, I'm Barbara Hancock. I write for Orbit Publishing as Willa Reese. My first magic realism fantasy has cottagecore witches taking down the patriarchy in their small town.
Most excellent. Deborah.
Hi, I am Deborah Blake, writing as Deborah Blake because I have no imagination whatsoever. And I have 3 witchy series, although one's really an offshoot of the other. We've got Wickedly Dangerous, which is the first of the Baba Yaga series, which were inspired by the Russian fairy tale witches who were neither good nor evil, but would kick your ass if you invited it. Oops, no, so much for PG. And then the Charmed series, which came after that. And I also have the Veil Magic series, which was more urban fantasy than paranormal romance.
And you write nonfiction as well, right?
Yes, a lot of it. I actually have my 12th book from Llewellyn coming out in a month, less than a month, on modern witchcraft, plus a book from St. Martin's Press. So yeah, I'm about evenly divided between nonfiction writing on witches and fiction writing, which is mostly on witches, but also I have a cozy mystery series with cats and dogs and no witches.
Okay. Seressia.
Hi, I'm Seressia Glass. I've written urban fantasy and paranormal romance. My Sons of Anubis series are Jackal Shapeshifters. My urban fantasy series is Shadow Chasers, where my hero and heroine both worship Egyptian gods. Currently, I am writing rom-coms for Berkeley.
I love rom-coms.
Oh, I can't wait. Ceressia's got a book coming out in December that is going to be so good. David, what about you?
I'm David R. Slayton. I live in Denver, Colorado, and I write the Adam Binder series. They're about a broke gay witch from Guthrie, Oklahoma, who has to migrate to Denver. The first one is White Trash Warlock. It came out last year. The second one is Trailer Park Trickster. It'll be out October 12th from Blackstone Publishing in print, ebook, and audio. And the third book, Deadbeat Druid, will be out in 2022.
I love your titles. Every time
The titles are fabulous.
Aren't those great? So why do we as both writers and readers love to have witches in our fiction? What is the draw? I mean, obviously I know what it is for me, but what is it for you, Seressia? What's the draw of having these kind of magical witchy people in your fiction?
It kind of goes back to representation because, it started for me watching Bewitched, and I know I'm dating myself, so not the Nicole Kidman version, but the actual TV series back in the day. I really enjoyed watching that, reading about good witches, and there's been such a negative connotation for them. So I really like that people are taking the word and taking the religion and all aspects of paganism and putting a positive light on it. And so that's kind of part of why I love to write them. I like, it's kind of, most of mine are female centric. So it's all about the feminine power and, girl power, kicking ass. Wait, are we 10 minutes? And being able, kicking ass and making spells and, doing what they need to do to save the world one spell at a time. So I just really enjoy exploring different aspects of nature magic, learning that and, kind of incorporating my own kind of views and stuff into the stories. So I just really like to be able to do that.
Yeah. Endora was one of my heroes. So what about you, Deborah?
Well, they say write what you know. And I am a witch. So, oh dear, I've just been outed. Yeah, well, never mind. It's not like it's a secret. Part of it is that I wanted to write a more realistic witch, not necessarily, realistic in that they'd be like me, but, couldn't necessarily do things without consequences. Although my Baba Yaga witches are pretty powerful, but there were prices to pay, things like that, which in real witchcraft there are. You don't just get to. Oh, I did. Sorry. So obviously, I like witches. I'm fascinated by witches, and I wanted to do something that inspired me, and I love the old fairy tales, and I wanted to do a retold fairy tale with a witch in it, but I wanted to do one that hadn't been used 1,000 times, which there were. And my background is actually as a Russian Jew, so I grew up with the Baba Yaga tales, which are Russian. And when my agent said to me, "Oh, you should write another witch story, come up with something new and different,"
They always do that, don't they? It's like, make it new.
Except, of course, the traditional Baba Yagas were usually presented as these old crones with beaky noses and never mind. But so I of course had to make them kick-ass gorgeous females, because it's way more fun that way.
It is much more fun that way. Well, David, you look at it from a different perspective and have those titles. I swear to God, they're so much fun.
Thank you.
So tell me why you love doing that, and why you feel like that's such a fun way to play in the world.
Well, and something Seressia said makes, I like writing from a place of female empowerment, though Adam is male. The most powerful characters in my fiction tend to be female, and he is very low on the magical spectrum. And I kind of, like Deborah said, I wanted to approach it from a place of getting more into the realism to a degree. I'm very happy when my Wiccan friends yes, thank you for the way you handled tarot. You did that right. Getting that seal of approval. But also just, I wanted to draw on some of those ideas. For example, the term warlock. The term warlock doesn't mean what we think it does. When we all grew up with Bewitched and ideas that a warlock means a male witch, that's not the origin of the term. So I wanted to play with some of those things. It's actually a really old word for traitor, someone who's betrayed those principles of magic. So I really like the fact that I think most people are drawn to writing about witches and reading about witches because, think of Willow in Buffy. She's nerdy, she's gay, she's the kid that was picked on, and she ends up being this total, to use tonight's phrase, badass. And I love that about her. I love that she got to flip that around and be empowered. So I want to write characters that are like that. They're underdogs who get to do something special in the world that other people don't.
Yeah. Barbara, what about you?
I agree about the empowerment. I have always written about women finding themselves and finding their power. And the thing about the wise women, the Appalachian wise women in my book, is that you're coming from a culture that kind of sees women's work or any arts or crafts as weak. And so I wanted to subvert that idea and make stitchery and handwork and basket weaving and the brewing and cooking and all of that, the gardening, all of that is where the power is in my book. And just subvert the idea that, women's work isn't powerful, or creative or artist work isn't powerful or meaningful, or so I made it literally magic in my book, and take the woman's places in the kitchen and make it a place of extreme power and influence. And so that has just been so much fun to be able to do that.
Well, that actually leads beautifully, thank you very much, into the next question, which is, where is it that you have the most fun with this? I mean, obviously you're empowering people into the places that formerly are not thought of as powerful, Barbara, but has there been something that you've just kind of chuckled about and gone, I'm so glad I did that. That was so much fun.
It has been so cathartic to write about a corrupt politician and a corrupt cult religious leader. Yeah, to have the women bring them down. Spoilers, but yeah. I mean, that has just been oh my gosh, it's just the best fun.
What about for you, Seressia? What's just been the most gleeful fun about writing in your world with the witches?
Oh Lord, I was sitting there thinking, do I have anything fun, or are they all just angsty bitches that like to, just.
Well, I will say one thing that I personally find fun about yours is they're sexy as all get out.
Okay, well, there is that. So yeah, if you think sex is fun, and yeah, I do too. So yeah, I guess that's the fun part. Because in the first Sons of Anubis, her power is generated by her, having sexual relations, because she takes that aspect of Isis and uses that to power her work, the mother goddess. And even though there are other goddesses in that pantheon that are more about the fertility. Hi, Toby, thank you. I really do like the fact that she did that. And, there's always in romance, there's the scorn of the magical vajayjay. So I just really wanted to write a character that actually had a magical vajayjay. So yeah.
I love that.
So cool.
I think my dog does not like the phrase magical vajayjay, so I'm gonna stop it right there.
Is it a boy dog or a girl dog?
He's a boy dog.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, there we go.
There you have it.
What about you, David? What's fun for you?
Well, Adam, so one of the things Adam has to deal with is he's very low magic. He doesn't have a lot of power. He's described as sensitive. Because he flies under the radar, he can see things that hide there. But he's constantly coming up against these powers, these beings who are so much more than him, and so much they just terrify him. And very early on, I got to introduce one of them, Argent, the Queen of Swords. And she has so much magic, she could just incinerate him if she felt like it. But she's this incredibly all-powerful goddess-type being, but she likes to steal cars and play tricks. So she's constantly running around in this trickster model, and he's just like, you're mocking me, you're making fun of me, you're taking time out of this world-saving critical thing we have to do to make fun of me. She's like, yeah. So
dude, of course.
she's a scene stealer. I have to rein her in, or she would take over every book.
Okay, so you at least have to write a novella at some point, just from her point of view, doing something silly and fun. You have to.
I would love to, but in book 2, she hijacks Adam's love interest and forces him to go on a road trip through the spirit realm, which is
road trip.
Just a blast.
That's great. Deborah, what about you? Now, I know there's got to be a lot of fun across all 3 series. So,
well, there are, and partially because I insist on putting humor in all of my books, just because that's me. Even the most serious things have some humor in them, and that's a good survival trait. I think my most fun thing was, the Baba Yaga books. There's 3 different Baba Yagas, because in the ancient tales, if you looked, they often talked about the sisters, the multiple Baba Yagas. And so for me, it was a role, not an individual person. But the first Baba Yaga, the one in Wickedly Dangerous, Barbara, she's kind of cranky. and I really enjoyed channeling my own inner cranky in this character who just was she didn't really like people. She didn't like, having to deal with, the people who knocked on her door to ask for guidance and help. And that was the part of her job she hated the most. And she was always, threatening to turn people into toads. She only did it the once though. And that
one
person
time.
really deserved it. But yeah, that for me, that was the most fun. Well, all right, that and each of these Baba Yagas lives in some sort of a traveling house, because the original Baba Yagas in the tales lived in these huts on chicken legs that moved through the forest. So Barbara's traveling house was a Airstream trailer, which was just a fun fantasy anyway. But one of the things, and each of the Baba Yagas has a animal that looks like, the first two are dogs and then the third one was a cat, because everyone went, "You're a crazy cat lady, why are you putting dogs in your books?" But they're actually the dragon Chudo Yudo in disguise. And so the first one was this giant white pit bull that was really a dragon in disguise. And in the trailer, the door would play games because it was a magical trailer. I mean, it really wasn't a trailer, it was a hut. And so, the sheriff, who's the love interest in the first book, goes to knock on the door and the door is not there. And then he goes and looks again and the door is back again. And those kind of, just basically playing with people's heads was hysterically fun.
That is so cool. I think that's one of the benefits or the joys of writing any kind of magic system, is that you can do things like that. And just I mean, you mentioned in Bewitched, Seressia, and that sort of trickster part that came out in that was so much fun to me. And I love that y'all have all used it in a different way. It's so cool. Switching gears, what do you think is the hardest thing about writing witches realistically and well, so that they come across, as real people rather than a character? What about you? What do you think about that, David?
I think the hardest thing is that it's not just, so we have the idea of the fictional witch, right? We have all these different archetypes and ideas and tropes. And this is also a living religion for many people. This is a real tradition that many people grew up with, like Deborah. And this isn't just, for me, the hardest thing was I wanted to make sure that I was showing respect. So I think a lot of people, especially when you're gay, you go through a phase of looking into witchcraft and Wicca. And I certainly went through my period of reading all of Starhawk's books and, memorizing the spiral dance and being very inspired and caught up in that. The hardest part for me was I wanted Adam and his family and the people around him to be part of the tradition, even though they're a bit adjacent, because they're very much rural head witches from Oklahoma. And at the same time, I wanted to be respectful of the traditions that were there and not co-opt or try to overstate. So I try to dance a very careful line with that, because I do have so many friends in that community. It's a community I have been a part of in my time. And that was the hardest thing for me, was making, and also not coming out with any of the bad cliches of too powerful or over powerful. Or I really love what Deborah was saying about magic has a price or a balance. One of the things that's always driving me crazy in fantasy is when someone can just walk in and throw fireballs and do all these incredible acts, but there's no payback in the universe.
Yeah, they're never exhausted. I don't know why.
Yeah, and Adam is very conscious of cost, and he's very conscious of the fact that if he wanted more magic, he would have to bargain for it, probably with people in powers he'd rather not talk to, including elves, who he thinks are pricks. And will tell you repeatedly in the book.
Barbara, what do you think?
All the elves I know are perfectly lovely people.
It's all his ex's fault. The boy who broke his heart was an elf, and it's just, there's history and drama, because
Because we all got history and drama.
conflict is the heart of fiction.
That's right. What about you, Barbara? What do you think is one of the harder things?
So one of the harder things for me is that I'm an organic writer. And so as this new magical system started creating itself as I was writing the book, I wanted to be careful as like he said about being respectful, being careful about appropriation.
Yeah, because those Appalachian witches,
one of the things. Well, the thing is, the region, this is my region. I grew up in the Appalachians, and I grew up with a lot of these beliefs. The sentient forest was my own creation, but it's not far away from how people talk and act in this area. Definitely my family, we anthropomorphize everything. and so that the hardest part was creating this whole new system and making sure that it as it grew.
Well, apparently she peeved the wrong elf.
There we go.
Freeze.
All right, so I'm going to ask you the question, Seressia.
Sorry, I got cut off.
Ah, there we go. She's back. Yay.
Sorry.
It happens.
Sorry. I don't know what happened. I just lost my connection.
Every now and again it happens. We just roll with
I
it.
think I'm back. Yeah, but that was the hardest part for me, was creating a whole new magical system without trying not to step on any toes as I was doing that.
Right. Yeah, I can see that totally, especially, in that area. That people can get pretty sensitive about it. I come from that area too. So, Seressia, what do you think was one of the hardest things? Oh, you're muted, babe.
Yeah, I'm muted because, the dog who shall not be named, who's now not in here. So the hardest part for me, I did not want my witches to be Wiccan, because that is a living religion, and there are, rules and practices according to that religion. Even though there are bunches of different subsets of that, so I just kind of make them kind of pagan. But almost all of my witches are Black, African American. So I wanted to bring in with one series that I did, that the Legere Legacy. It's a generational magic. So it's the magic that's been passed down to the eldest daughter, who's becomes the head of the family. And the main character in the first book does not have the power. She thinks she doesn't have the power. So that's part of her anxiety, is trying to balance her responsibilities as the inheritor of her mother's, who is of course very powerful, her mother's legacy in magic, with trying to have a normal life because she thinks that she does not have this magic. And then of course with my other series, there's a bunch of Egyptian mythology and Egyptian magic. So the hardest part was trying to find the right chants and the right processes that the priests and the priestesses used when they were calling upon the gods to help them do their work. So just trying to find the research and trying to do it in the right way, with my own enhancements, because it's fiction. That's been hard, but it's also been fun, because it's one of the things I like to do, and it helped me stick to the research and keep going with it.
And the research there is so much fun.
Yes.
Deborah, you have 3 series, obviously. So what was, feel free to each one. What was hardest?
Well, it's really the same thing. The first 2 series were in the same world. The Riders series was an offshoot of the Baba Yaga series. They were side characters who showed up in the first 3 books, and then each got their own book. But I actually used to teach classes on writing witchcraft in fiction. And one of the things that I always told my students is that the most important thing to do when you come up with a magical system, no matter whether it's Egyptian or made up or whatever, is to be consistent. When you when you come up with that system, I mean, mine, I had one series that was the Baba Yagas that was, they were real like fairy tale witches. They could snap their fingers and have things happen, but they couldn't do everything. And so you had to figure out to begin with what they could do and what they couldn't do and what their price was. And the Veiled Magic series was, that's the urban fantasy one, where these were hereditary witches. Witches were actually a kind of paranormal. There were dragons. There were no vampires. But you had
Those
to
damn
figure out-
bloodsuckers.
right. There were ghouls. That was a whole nother thing. But you had to figure out what the rules were for the magic, and then you had to make sure you stuck to them throughout the book. You couldn't have somebody say, snap their fingers in book 1, but be limited by certain factors. And then in book 2, somebody else went, oh, I'm going to snap my fingers with no limits. So that consistency in your magical world, in your magical rules, you have to have rules. I know it sounds like it's kind of a party pooper, you get a witch with rules, but that's, that for me, when you're coming up with when you're designing the magic that the people in your books can do, you have to figure out, are there no limits? Are there some limits, and what those limits are, and stick to them.
Right, absolutely. Well, again, I want to switch gears a little bit. And, in so many books that come out, the witches are the bad guys. And I know that some of that is, as we've sort of touched on tonight, some of that is just the pattern from fairy tales, or the pattern from the patriarchy, if you will. But why do you think that's always been part of the tradition, and why do you think it's changing? Let's start with you, David.
I went first last time. I think it is just part patriarchy. So a lot of my time in college I spent studying medieval history, and I spent studying things like witch trials, and I honestly just think it's straight up misogyny, really. that's my vote. And I think we say it's always been part of the tradition, but it hasn't always. It only goes back a certain amount of time. And I think that's one of the beautiful things of the last probably 30, 40 years. When you look at books like Barbara J. Walker, Merlin Stone, you have thinkers and people trying to dig out what they can. And I could do a whole history lecture for hours on this and bore you to tears, but I won't.
Well, I don't think you would bore this crew at all. But
I don't think we don't have time for it, at least. But I do think that you have a reclamation happening of trying to excavate what those traditions are. A lot of those traditions are oral, and many of us have talked about what was passed down to us, what we learned. And that's certainly what I used for Adam. But I just think it's a holdover from those times. I think that is fading. I love to see that witches are heroines. I love to see that they're heroes, and they're no longer being stigmatized in that way. And I love that the traditions that we're being presented with are branching out from just that. Like I love Granny Weatherwax in Terry Pratchett. She's probably one of my all-time favorite fictional witches. She actually is, I think, my all-time favorite fictional witch. But I love that we're seeing other traditions looking at things like what came out of Africa, what came out of not just the Greco-Roman and the whole medieval Western Europe, but we're getting all kinds of other ideas around witchcraft. So I think it's fading, witches as villains, and I certainly hope that it's fading. Because again, my answer on this one's always just going to be misogyny, straight up.
What's your answer, Seressia?
Yeah, I agree with David. It was kind of a power thing. People are afraid of things that they don't understand, and they always need somebody or something to pick on. So a woman being independent and living by herself in a hut, why is she not getting married? Why is she, there's just if it's something that they don't understand, or is some way that they can be better or exert power over somebody, then it's easy to pick on the little old lady living by herself, or the woman that you don't like. You go back to the Salem witch trials and how that all started and how that ended. so it's just easy to pick on, somebody who's different and strange, and or is acting strange or doesn't fit into your view of the world and the way things should be. And it's kind of like voodoo and voodoo, that religion. A lot of people were scared of it because, oh, the zombies, or, putting the spell on a serpent and the rainbow. Never saw it, but it scared the death out of me when I was a child, that movie. And then once I actually met some voodoo priestesses, and I'm just like, y'all are pretty cool. Okay, so there's nothing scary here. So thank you for educating me. And I think that the advent of things like Sabrina, Charmed 1 and 2, and Willow, having those witches enter our entertainment and changing our worldview one episode at a time, I think it's made it cool. I mean, you still have some of the other movies. What was the one with The Craft or The Coven? I can't remember. The Craft, I think. Whatever that movie was. But anyway,
That's the one.
yeah, so thank you. So you still have, that mixing that with the teen drama and people getting excited. And then, of course, mixing it with the teen drama, suddenly there were witches, teenage witches everywhere, which was, good.
And you always have to have the faction that are the mean girls. So.
Yes, exactly. So I think that it has entered the mainstream with shows like that. And I think that has been kind of the turnaround and renaissance that we've needed for witches.
I think, what is it, 12 seasons of The Good Witch on Hallmark probably has done a lot for making us more mainstream. What do you think, Barbara?
I think definitely the not just women with power frighten certain people, but also any marginalized communities that aren't part of the mainstream evangelical community. I think when they have power, in my book, the wise women are, there are LGBTQ plus people and Black people, and the women, like you said, living alone, making their own choices, pushing back against the cult leader who thinks, has a very narrow view of what women are for. And I think that whenever you have those situations, like to the cult leader in my book, the wise women are villains. They are the bad guys because they do have power and they use it to protect their community. And so that I agree with that. It's definitely misogyny and bigotry. It's bigotry.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Deborah?
I'm going to get myself into trouble here.
No, you're not. No, you're not.
If you look at history, it's actually very clear. The Christian church, don't get me wrong, I have lots of friends who are Christians. I'm not talking about Christians today. I'm talking about when the Christian church started and moved into Europe. It was a power play. It was political. And the pagan people were the ones who were there already. They had their gods that they worshiped. And pagan actually is a word which means dweller in the country, because the last people to sort of bow to this new religion were the dwellers in the country. The kings went first, then the rich people in the cities, and then it spread out. And what happened was, when Christianity got to the country where these people were very entrenched in their own spiritual beliefs, they had to find some way to remove the power from the people who had it. And those people didn't have power the way they were looking at it. They were looking at the wise woman in the village who people listened to because she knew the herbal remedies that would fix them and she could deliver their babies. And yes, maybe she led them in some ritual or another to celebrate the summer solstice. And so what they did is they went in there and they literally set out to discredit these people. And they built their churches on top of sacred pagan spaces, and they found all of these ways to take the power away so they would still have it. And it worked, obviously, because look at who's in power now. It's not the pagans. Although some of us.
Well, and the co-opting of so many holidays and so many other things.
Oh, yeah.
And also,
Right.
it's a good.
Yuletide Mary. Anybody sound familiar? So that's part of it. And then, of course, we've got the modern version of the evil witch that's in Hollywood and in books. And frankly, it was just an easy, fun thing to do. I don't think that actually had any purpose to it, other than the fact that they were creating, a villain and this evil witch, which had traveled down through the pathways of our culture. That was an easy thing, yes, the old crone with the crooked nose,
And awards. Don't forget the wart. There always has to be a wart.
I don't want to talk about that. But yeah, so for a long time, Hollywood and authors and things like that, it was sort of a cliche that they could work with, because let's face it, it's a lot more interesting to do a movie about an evil witch than it is to do about some woman who lives in a 130-year-old farmhouse in the middle of upstate New York with a bunch of cats. What do you mean? Nobody wants to do a movie about me. I've tried.
I would totally watch a movie about you. You are fascinating.
Thank you. And my cats think so. But that's basically my answer. Is it's two things. One of which was it was a political power move. And the other is it's just more fun to portray a certain section as evil, because, the reality is that some woman who goes out and talks to the goddess under the full moon, not that interesting, except me, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, because you had actually mentioned it before, I'm going to ask you to continue with the question that comes up next. Is you had already mentioned consistency as the thing that you would tell an author writing about witchcraft or incorporating witches and magic into their world. What is another piece of advice you would give to a beginning writer or a writer who's deciding to start putting these elements in? What's another piece of advice you might give a writer starting into a witchy fiction project?
I guess decide what kind of witch you want. Do you want a realistic witch, somebody that you could walk down the street in real life and meet, plus, somebody who's like that, but maybe has a little something extra, like they read tarot cards and write a bunch of books. I'm just saying. So do you want, a realistic possible witch, a witch who, maybe has a few more powers than most people find acceptable in our world, but is believable?
Right.
Or do you want an absolutely fictional, say, fairy tale kind of witch who can do this, snap her fingers and turn you into a toad if she is, so motivated? Or do you want a witch that's something completely different from that? That's where you start out, I think, is what kind of witch do you want?
And as you said, but what are powers and what are limits? Yeah. Seressia, what do you think? What would be a piece of advice you would give?
Well, you're writing fiction, so you can create your own system and have your own rules in that system. But again, like Deborah said, you've got to be consistent in it. It's entirely possible to create believable characters who seem like your friend down the street, but if you need a keep away spell, or if you need some love potion, or you need a fantastic gumbo. So yeah, you want them to be relatable, you want them to be real, and but also have this magical element to them, there's something extra, to something special. So I think the main thing is write it the way that you want to write it. It's safer to create your own versus trying to co-opt somebody else's, because if you get it wrong, they will let you know. And I don't want to get anything wrong. So that's why I created my own kind of system, my own take on it.
Yeah. I think that's so, and it's so fun.
Yes.
Creative. What about you, David? What do you think? What would be a piece of advice you would give? Oop, you're muted.
I want to blend both of those answers a little bit. If you're going to write it, so again, like Seressia, I'm going to put my witches and my magic over here and separate that from Wicca as a religion and as much as I can. So I want to pick up on that a little bit. Anytime you're writing about somebody whose experience is not your own, if you're not going to do your own thing, talk to them. So being gay, it's like whenever someone who doesn't have my experience writes about me, sometimes like, you can tell they didn't get a sensitivity reader or they didn't talk to anybody. If you need to write beyond your experience, talk to people and try to avoid cliches and stereotypes as much as you can. Try to look, again, it'd be really easy to write the Wicked Witch of the West. Wouldn't be so easy to write Wicked and to flip that stereotype around or to try to find the good or the different perspective, which is something I really like about the way witches are being written lately, is to go back to Elphaba, go back to Maleficent. Why are they perceived this way and who are they really? So I just would encourage you that whenever you're going to write about anybody whose experience is different than your own, ask questions, read books, just get beyond. And if you can, talk to people who have the experience you're writing about. But I really like what Seressia said of, it's okay to make your own system, your own world. And I certainly do in my epic fantasies. But the consistency is key. If a character is all powerful in book one, you start getting into the Sailor Moon problem where they just get bigger and bigger, and you can't keep up if you keep upscaling the powers. You gotta set your limits and know how you want your characters to level up power-wise so your series can stay believable.
You don't want the OP problem you have with so many of the manga and the. My son is always, I don't know, it's always OP, it's too OP, way overpowered.
Well, and I would add to that nobody wants a character who's perfect. There's no fun in characters who can do whatever they want. And where's the challenge in that? There has to be some weakness. There has to be, whether it's a physical weakness or an emotional weakness or a weakness in their power, there has to be something that makes them somebody that the reader can identify with. If you have this all powerful magical witch who can do whatever they want, that's going to be boring by page 10.
Totally. Barbara, what about you? What do you think is some advice you'd give somebody who was just starting down this path?
Well, I agree with David and Deborah. I mean, in my book is the characters are very down to earth, literally. They're literally down to earth. And so you have, it's shades of gray as far as good and bad go, because there are definitely some salty, wise women in my story who are justifiably angry about the situation. And so definitely I would say, if you're going to create a story about witches or a magical system, or come up with your own magical system, human beings are not all good or all bad. And so especially if you're a character driven writer, you're going to feel that, and you're going to know that. And as as they make their decisions, and they grow and change, they're going to be learning from their experiences. But definitely don't have Glinda on one side and then the Wicked Witch on the other. You can have, like, in my book, it's very you have Granny, who is like the Obi-Wan figure, okay, in my book. And but even she has to really think about the decisions that she makes. And, she's the brewer, and she makes some brewing mistakes that she has to own up to as she's trying to fix things. And so that's, make sure that it's not black or white. It's, all shades in between. and make sure that you make your characters believable that way, because that's how people are. And witches are people. Wise women are people.
They're just a little different. Just a little different. So
Deborah saying
other than your
they're extra. They're people that are just a little extra. Especially in my book, because they're all creatives. They're all like artists and creatives. And so they're all a little extra.
slightly eccentric.
Speaking as a woman who runs an artist cooperative with 50 artists, I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, my mother, for years, my mother told me to write what I know. And she is so pleased with herself. She is so pleased with herself that this has worked out, because this is like basically my family that I have written about.
So what do you think? Obviously, y'all's books are fabulous. What do you think some of the best portrayals in fiction and in television have been? I mean, we mentioned Willow and Buffy. I personally think Practical Magic did a great job of sort of bringing it down to earth and being, like, we just had a little extra. What are some thoughts that y'all have?
Garden Spells.
Garden
I
Spells?
loved Garden Spells by Sarah Addison Allen. I mean, the joy of my life was her liking my book, because I can remember reading her book when my children were small, and just it just blew my mind, because it was like I said, like my family, because it's like a Southern family. And there's one character, I can't think of her name. She's my favorite witch ever. She's a much older lady, and when she touches an item, she knows where it belongs, and she influences the whole town, and they all, she's eccentric, and they all think she's, they kind of like, maybe they want her to give them something, and maybe they don't want her to give them something. And it's great, because she's got this big handbag, and she's always pulling out these little items and saying, here, you need this. I love that character. I love that character. Book. She's my favorite. Fabulous. I can't think of the character's name. But Garden Spells, great book.
Obviously 2 votes for that. So Deborah, what do you think? What are some of the, I mean, obviously you've probably read a lot, because I'm sure people get you to quote their books. But I have no memory.
So trying to, you mentioned Good Witch, which, it's a Hallmark, sort of slightly sweet kind of thing. But I actually kind of like that as a TV show, because they, the witches in there, while they have these gifts, which is fairly realistic. The witches that I know, some of them have one gift, some of them have another gift, but they can't do everything. They can't, they are limited, and they're flawed, which, I like. Also, it's a romance and there's happy endings, which I'm very fond of too. Practical Magic, the book, actually, and there were a couple of different books in that series. Those were lovely, and I liked the movie too, but I actually liked the book better. Big surprise. Yeah. Yeah. And I actually, not a witch but a wizard, I love the Harry Dresden books. Yes.
They're fun.
Those are great. I knew it would come to me if I thought about it. Kim Harrison. Her series,
Dead Witch Walking.
Yeah. Those
new one just came
actually inspired my urban fantasy series, because I loved the way she took what we expected and turned it around. And even when she took conventional paranormal creatures like vampires, they weren't what you expected. They weren't, not every witch had a black cat, although it does happen.
It happened
too. But that series again is a great example of power with limits and prices, and also the interactions between all of the different characters I thought were wonderful. The family she built for herself, which
Yeah.
is one of the things that I like to do in my books, is, it's not necessarily the family you're born to, but the family you create. I love the Kim Harrison books. To me, were one of the best witches ever.
What do you think, Tracy? What are your faves?
I was hoping you were going to forget me. Because I can't think of any. Deborah took the couple that I had thought of.
But you can agree with me. It's okay.
Well, I wholeheartedly agree with what Deborah said. Just put a big ass ditto, TTO, to what she said. The Good Witch, I like that because, like you were saying, they're so normal. That main character is so normal. She just happens to have a little extra. So I like that because it makes it's not fearful to somebody. Because when I started pitching paranormal series, they're like, oh, that's satanic. That's what editors were telling me when I was like, Black people won't read that because they're all church going and they'll think that it's satanic and it won't sell. So
You have proved them quite wrong.
Yes. So thank goodness that I did not listen to them. I had a hard head.
Well,
I just really like that.
You mentioned Willow too.
Yes. Willow, you're right. Because there are so many girls who identified as well, the geeky, shy, kind of awkward person. Then suddenly she discovers this power, and then, and you can see how she grows with it and adjusts to her new life with this new gift that she has that she's finally uncovered. So I really enjoyed watching her evolution. And then of course, they had to do what they did to her, and I just really hated Josh, but then there's bunches of reasons to hate Josh.
Yes, there are.
So we'll just move that to the side. So I really like her, and I like the Good Witch. I like how the Charmed sisters, even though they have these powers, they do still have battles within themselves and within their internal and external conflicts that they're trying to overcome. So I like those portrayals too.
Yeah, I always liked them as well. David, what about you?
Well, I mentioned Terry Pratchett. Granny Weatherwax is probably my all-time favorite, and my first English teacher in high school gave me his first book, and I had been reading him my whole life. And
good English teacher.
Oh yeah, it was amazing. Well, and again, we're in Oklahoma, where we're trying to find good stuff where you feel any kind of diversity or see yourself reflected. But what I love the most about Granny is there's a great moment in Weird Sisters, which is a wonderful parody of Macbeth, where there's so many times where Granny could use magic to take over, or she could use magic to solve the problem, but she won't be that person. And she just about snaps once in Weird Sister and causes the wheels to fall off a cart because somebody doesn't show her proper respect. And there's a great one, Carpe Jugulum, where the witches go up against the vampires, and the vampires think they're going to turn Granny evil, and she ends up turning them. So like, why do I suddenly crave tea and a biscuit? And that's the beauty of how Terry Pratchett wrote Granny was anytime he could go for the dark side or the pain, he would instead go for the funny. And Granny has such a beautiful way of reining herself in and realizing, like Magrat, the youngest of the witches, is always trying to, well, why don't we just use magic to fix everything? And Granny's like, because it would never stop. We would just always be using magic to fix everything. And that's not what we're for. It'd be much easier just to tell somebody to fuck off than it would be to curse them. So if you've never read the Terry Pratchett witch books, Witches Abroad, where they have to travel, which is a parody of Anne Rice, is amazing. So Terry Pratchett, Witches Abroad, that's my favorite witch. I loved Willow. I did not like the magical addiction storyline.
I didn't either.
I've forgiven it to a degree because the way that I come to think about it is those of us who play a lot of video games or live in fiction started thinking of it as, well, it's a way to, you can't disassociate completely from the world and go live in magic. You can't go live in that in video games or in space outside of reality. That's how I've kind of come to think about it over time. So I've become more forgiving of it. But I didn't like that you took, you know, the one gay character and then killed the other gay character to make her go evil. The bury your gays trope, which everyone loved at that time period. But I did love how she found power, and that's badass scene in season 4 where she goes up against Glory and kicks her ass. That's like, yeah.
There were many of us cheering for that. And I wish they'd sort of continued on that path and her exploring it. But as Seressia said, there are several things that we can blame Josh for. So anyway, well, this has been absolutely fabulous and so much fun. We're about out of time, so I'm going to ask each of you to tell our viewers where they can find you on the web, where they can find your books, and where they can find you. Let's start with you, Seressia.
Well, if you can spell my first name, you can pretty much find me. My handle on Twitter is @Seressia. Facebook is the same. My website is SeressiaGlass.com. And I'm on Instagram also as @Seressia Glass. So you can spell my name, you can find me. There aren't that many of us out there.
Barbara?
Same thing, WillowReese.com. And it's REECE, WillowReese.com. And I am Willow Reese on Twitter and Instagram, and even TikTok.
David, where can we find you?
Just look for David R. Slayton. I'm all over social media. I am also trying to master TikTok. I'm terrible at it right now.
I'm terrible at it too.
But if you look for me, don't forget the R or the Y in Slayton. But look, if you don't put the R in, I didn't realize there were so many David Slaytons in the world when I started writing. And there's a couple of Florida man types out there. So David R. Slayton. If you go to davidslayton.com, all my social media handles are right there on the first page.
Most excellent. Deborah?
Also, if you can spell my first name correctly, that's the long biblical way, Zeborah. Yes, I am on Facebook as Deborah Blake. There's also a Deborah Blake author page, but for some weird Facebooky reason, somebody else has a Deborah Blake author page, and you can't necessarily find me without looking for my picture of me. I'm on Twitter as @Deborah Blake, on Instagram as @Deborah Blake author, but the best way to find me is probably to go to my website, which is DeborahBlakeAuthor.com, and then I've got links to every place except TikTok, which I just went, oh no, I'm too old.
And I'm your host, Jeanne Adams. You can find me at JeanneAdams.com, and on social media, I'm on Twitter way too often. And you can find me here at ConTinual all the time. Thank you again to our panelists, and have a great day.
Thank you for having us.